Hello, everybody. My name is Jennifer Scheich. I'm the editor of Farm Journal's Pork, and I serve as first vice president of the Livestock Publications Council. Um, I'm also very grateful that I get to be a part of the LPC's education committee, and I co-lead that with Angie Denton. And one of the big responsibilities that we have is basically putting together coffee and collaborations. We try to do them almost every month. Our goal is to create an opportunity for our members and others to come together to talk about topics that are issues or challenges or opportunities that we have in our lives as particularly livestock communicators, but agricultural journalists. And so we're just really grateful that you guys could join us today. We're super excited to dig into this topic of crafting the narrative, taking complex concepts and turning them into feature stories with impact. Had some really good conversations with some of you that are not speaking, but are in front of me now, where we've talked about how challenging it can be to sometimes have this big, huge topic and trying to figure out how do we boil this down and how do we create piece or pieces that will really resonate with an audience and help serve them better. And so I'm looking forward to learning from our two experts today, who I'll introduce in just a minute. But just a couple of quick housekeeping things. If you've never been a part of this before, we have the chat button down at the bottom. If you click on that, everybody's starting to chime in to let us know who they are and where they're from, because part of our goal is to help each other get to know more people. And so that's one of the ways we do this. It's also the place where you can ask questions as we go. So if something pops up into your mind, feel free to jot it down as we go. And our speakers will answer those once they get through their slides at the end. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me a note down there as well. I'll be happy to answer those. So with that, I would like to turn it over for some quick introductions before they get started. Gil Gullickson, editor of Wallaces Farmer, would you please introduce yourself a little more? And thanks so much for joining us today.
Yes, well, thanks, Jennifer. I'm Gil Gullickson. I'm the editor for Wallace's Farmer magazine. That's part of the Farm Progress group. And I guess I've been around for a while. I kind of feel like, in Major League Baseball, they always have those relief pitchers they bring in the ninth that maybe sometime they were a starter, but they're still trying to be vital in the team. So that's me. But yeah, I've been with Wallace's Farmer over a year, and just outstanding group of people we have at Farm Progress.
Thank you so much for joining us. I disagree with your analogy there, but whatever you want to think. I'm always learning from you, and I'm grateful you're here. Okay, and now we also have Courtney Meyers with Texas Tech University, where she is a professor, and I'll let her introduce herself a little more thoroughly.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thank you all for joining today. I'm having flashbacks to when we had to teach hybrid, and it is great to have a good crowd here for this presentation. I am in my 17th year here at Texas Tech. I see at least one former student on this call. I'm lucky to work across the hall from Dr. Kennedy, who many of you know. I am originally from Kansas. I got my bachelor's at Kansas State University. And then my post grad work was at the University of Arkansas and the University of Florida. So I'm going to share my screen and get us started. And then once I get done, I'll hand it over to Gil. Let's see. How's that look? Good? All right. So Gil and I met last week and we talked about this topic. And what I really like is that by pairing an educator with a practicing journalist, you get a little bit of the theory and then in practice perspective. So what I did for my portion of today is I really thought about, in 10 to 15 minutes, what would I emphasize to my students as they're tackling complex topics? I hope for many of you, this is a reminder. My picture here is about when we have a complicated story and we need to help our readers or listeners or viewers get through that maze of information. We want to do so in a way that they don't get lost. And so that's the thought that I had as I put together a few comments here today. So again, I I know that I'm in the room with experts. I admire many of you and read your work and use it as examples in class, but I do think it never hurts to recognize we sometimes have expert blindness. And we could maybe use a refresher on kind of just how to approach this, or maybe you're training and working with junior writers and trying to help them improve their skills. So the first thing I think we all know is that it should be, can you all see my notes as well as my full slide, or just my full slide? Just the full slide. Okay. I'm like, oh no, they can see I'm cheating. So we're good. So in my classes, I always emphasize to students that there's two crucial things we do as agricultural communicators, and that is we need to recognize the purpose for what our communication effort is, and maybe more importantly, who is our audience. So recognizing that you all have an audience that you're writing to, and you should know them very well, but maybe you're new in your role or working with those who are trying to get up to speed. So as you're tackling a topic that is more complicated or complex, really reflect on these fundamentals. So who's your audience? What do they already know? What do they need to know? And then what questions will they want answered? So as any good educator, I want to give us an opportunity to practice. So let me.
Hey, Courtney. We're losing your audio, Courtney.
Oh no.
You-
Can y'all hear me?
We can now. I wonder, yeah, we hear you for like like maybe 10 seconds, and then it cuts out for quite a while.
Oh
So
no.
yeah. So I apologize.
No, that's okay. Thanks, everybody. I'm sure that's what the chat is full of, is just cutting out. I mean, I'm in my office on campus.
Yeah,
So
you should be in the best place of all.
I know.
I thought it was just my rural internet.
Well, and I'm surprised Lindsay didn't run across here and bang on my door. Okay, let's hope that it's rolling. So I guess that's the power of the PowerPoint, is that you can see some of what I was going to say. So for this, what I was curious about, again, because I teach college students, I often need to find articles that have some sort of novelty or unique appeal. So I ran across this article, and I'm just curious, as many of you write for a livestock publications outlet or related, what are the sorts of things that your readers might want to know about this sort of topic? So I'm going to purposefully be quiet just for a moment. Yes, and one of the comments says another reminder of remote teaching, this poor audio. So I imagine many of you are eating and you're thinking of questions your audience would have, and maybe they'll get in the chat here in just a moment. I'm going to keep pressing forward. This is an actual article that was published in November, and it was intriguing to me because it was addressing a new way to reduce food waste and to help farmers have a protein source to feed their chickens when they couldn't purchase corn because of the drought. And so it was it was an interesting story, but it made me think, I would want, as if I was a reader, I'd want to know, why are they doing this? Are these maggots spreading disease? If not, how are they overcoming that to help support the farmers in this region? And so on and so forth. So when I'm working with students, I'll sometimes have them write a headline and identify key questions that they would make sure to answer as they're tackling the story. And that helps them with some of these next steps. So the next thing is researching the topic. So if, that seems pretty cut and dry, and Gil's probably going to talk more about researching, but you need to do some research in order to identify what questions to ask. One of my favorite internships as a college student was with the Angus Journal. And I remember I was tasked with interviewing a geneticist who was working on improving the EPDs. And that was a new area for me. And so I spent a lot of time researching that and reading all I could, mainly because I didn't want to look like an idiot when I interviewed them, but also so that I knew what else I should be asking. So I looked at what had already been published, and this was in 2002. So really before social media, you couldn't put it out to your readers to ask what they wanted to know. But it helped me identify who I should be interviewing and what questions to ask each one. So I have some other questions here that I found in the literature. As an academic, I went to the literature and thought, well, what should I convey? And these are some key questions that people often have when you're tackling a complex topic. So what does it mean? What caused this issue? Why did it happen? What will be the effect or the results? What are the consequences? Who will be affected? And what will happen next? So we're in my communicating agriculture, the public class this semester, we're talking almost every day about bird flu, because I need them to connect the price of eggs that they see in the grocery store to what's happening on farm. And it's interesting that they're coming in a little bit more informed every day, because I think they're trying to figure out these questions, and we'll tackle other topics as the semester goes on. All right, so let me wrap up a few final things by sharing that there are some strategies you can use to overcome complexity when writing. Obviously, integrating quotes from your sources, and I'm sure Gil will give some examples of this. There's this book from some Texas A&M teachers, and you probably recognize Doug Starr's name, that they said to ask questions until you understand the situation. And so I thought that was a good strategy. You can also make numbers relatable by trying to compare the unknown to something known. So this is just an example I found online about, how powerful is a hurricane really. Others are to use analogies and metaphors. So I picked one example about DNA and how it's slightly different between an analogy and a metaphor. But these do help when you're tackling a complex topic to connect the unknown to something known or recognizable in someone's life. And we did a little bit of this in a study. Dr. Hill is now at Kansas State, Dr. Hill Sullins. And in her dissertation, we were curious about how the media was using metaphors to discuss gene editing or genome editing. And it was a fascinating look at how the media used a number of very recognizable terms to try to describe what gene editing is and how it's being used in our food production system. So just wanted to share a little bit about what we do in terms of AgCom research. And now I'm going to turn it over so you can hear from someone who's in the practice end of this. So Gil, I'm going to stop sharing and let you share yours.
Okay. Just bear with me. Come up here.
Sorry. Oh, never mind.
Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Jennifer emailed me I remember it was on December 19th. about this subject, how to turn a complex concept into a feature story. And right away, I think, oh, your timing could not have been better because I was just in the thick of this story. I think I was pretty happy the way it turned out, but it's one of those stories that you have to set aside plenty of time to do because it's very complex. And I always try and follow the example. There was a baseball player back around the turn of the 1900s. Wee Willie Keeler was his name. And he was 5'4.5", 140 pounds, dripping wet. But he could get on base all the time. I mean, lifetime batting average 341. He rarely struck out. He was one of the first members of Baseball Hall of Fame. And a sports writer asked him one time, "How do you get on base all the time?" And he just said, "Well, I just hit them where they ain't." I mean, he took a very complex subject like hitting a baseball and just made it very simple. I've always tried to do that, and stories, a lot of stories, they're fairly routine. People have written about that subject before, but I always try and keep my eye out and write them where they ain't, to have a subject that's never been turned over before, never been discussed. And I was at a meeting that Iowa State had. It was actually on December 6th, 2023, where Allison Robertson, she's an extension plant pathologist at Iowa State, she was nearing the end of her presentation. And she talked about this new rule the EPA was coming out for registering fungicides. And she talked about that they had been linked, a certain class of fungicides called the triazoles, to antimicrobial drug resistance in humans. And it was one of those things when she said that, I went up to her right afterward and said, "What were you talking about?" And lots of times I don't do that, but I mean, that was one where I just wanted more information because that had never got talked about before. So, as often happens, I went on to other things, kind of had some other stories to write. And she wrote a story for us in June of 2024, where in the very last paragraph, she mentioned it again. And I'm thinking, man, I think there's something to this. I should get on it. Well, that came right on the heels or right at the start of putting out the Farm Progress Show issue, which I was in charge of for the program. So that ate up most of July. August, I was doing some other things. Then I went to this field day that she spoke at on September 4th. And she talked about she's doing a disease triangle sign there, host environment and pathogen president or presence. And she mentioned it again, and I had lunch with her, and I said, "Oh, geez, do you think there's really something to it?" "Oh, yeah." And she gave me the names of a few folks to ask. And all along the summer, I had been asking people at field days, I'd ask farmers, "Have you ever heard of this?" And no one really had. And I kept asking that. And finally, I was in a meeting where Carl Bradley from the University of Kentucky, who's an extension plant pathologist who I knew when he was at North Dakota State, and I knew when he was at the University of Illinois. And I asked him about this, if there was any link between this fungicide class called triazoles and resistance in human microbial fungal drugs. And, oh yeah, he told me about it. And, I said that it's very concerning because we need fungicides. Diseases like tar spot, they're coming out along with the old familiar ones like northern corn leaf blight, and we need them. But on the other hand, if it's causing resistance in these class of drugs called azoles that are causing some very serious human health problems, that's kind of the rub. That's what's being discussed. So I gather that it was commonly told or commonly known in the plant pathologist community. So he gave me the lead on a plant pathologist at the University of Georgia, Marin Brewer, and she had actually done a webinar on it, I think in 2000 or 2021. So I watched the webinar. I did a phone interview with her, talked about it, and she's the go-to person in the plant pathology area. I mean, she's the person to talk, and she was the leading source in the article. But I wanted to get the medical side of it. And the University of Iowa has an excellent medical school. So I just emailed their folks in corporate communications and do you have anyone who could speak on this subject? And they said, oh yeah, we can give you a person. And Catherine Dalton, she's an assistant professor in the University of Iowa College of Public Health. Interesting person. She's not only in public health, she's also a veterinarian. So she knows a little bit about agriculture. So, she said, yeah, it's a concern, but on the other hand, we need fungicides too for agricultural production. So I knew between talking with those sources that I think I could come up with a pretty even-handed story on how to handle this. This is a cover of an EPA memorandum that came out last September where they talked about a review that was being done on antifungal resistance. And I think the thing that was really interesting is lots of times government agencies, they can have turf battles. They want to protect their own turf. They want to keep in their own silos. This one had not only EPA, but it has Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Food and Drug Administration, USDA. It had these four diverse players coming together on this subject. So that meant when you have all these folks coming together that this story had legs. So part of this was reviewing medical journal articles. I've viewed some agricultural ones too for plant pathology, but I wanted to get insight into the medical side of it because that was a new area for me. Um, this is the file that I had for this story, and I honestly tried to make it bigger, but there were just so many files in this. I had like mugshots of people, I had questions, I had transcripts of interviews, and I just kind of went through it. I started writing drafts. This was my first draft. I started on the 15th of December. I kind of wanted to set the stage with the vibrant green corn and soybeans field that form Iowa's summer landscape seemingly have not little in common with the sterile hospital room, and went through that. I wanted this really flowery description of it. So I kind of kept that lead, but I just kept going and going and going. And this was my story draft file. I had about 9 different story drafts by the time it actually appeared on the website and in the magazine. And every time you're just honing and honing and honing. And it's not so much writing as it is whacking, just trimming. Do I need that word? Do I need that paragraph? Do I need that whole set of paragraphs? Just trying to whittle it down to get to what the farmer wanted to know. I'm very fortunate in that I have 2 folks at our company that I rely on quite a bit when I come to a complex story. And I asked Holly Spangler to review it. She's an executive editor for Farm Progress, editor of Prairie Farmer Magazine, and she said it was really good. I think you got something there. But at that point, I was naming the generic names of the fungicides, your propiconazole, metaconazole, those kinds of things. No farmer would know what that meant. So she said, why don't you put in some product names? So I went through, I made sure they were a trizol class of fungicide, or they had these trizols in. So I changed it to name them from the companies. And I also asked Mike Wilson to review it. He's our executive editor who oversees Farm Progress editors. And he said, I think you really got something here. But going back to Courtney's concept, it's like, what do farmers already know and what do they need to know? And you need to get into it quickly or you're going to lose their attention. So I came up with a different lead and I got up there that there's this unsettling link between triafuel fungicides and resistance to human antifungal drugs. I waited until I told about what was happening there in the bold. As a result, federal regulators are starting to evaluate the relationship between triazole fungicides and azole antifungal drugs. If I would have had to do it again, over again, I'd put it up further, probably in the 3rd paragraph. It's one of those things that, boy, when you're right in the thick of this, you got all kinds of things going on. And that's one of the advantages of doing a webinar like this is it's kind of a postmortem on a story for what you can do better next time. One thing he said too is I was struggling, this story, it had everything except the companies who were making these fungicides to get quotes from them. it's like that old sick joke about, well, other than that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? There was something just missing in that story. So I had contacted these companies twice. I contacted a trade industry group, and I had one company, I thought they were gonna go for it, but for whatever reason, they backed out, which is fine. They may have had some reasons for doing that. And I really struggled with naming them, but at the same time, I gave them a chance to comment, and they, for whatever reason, they chose not to. I had asked one individual who knows everything about everything going on in Washington, and this individual had never heard of it. So I'm thinking that is really under the radar if this individual doesn't know about it. So I can't speculate why they didn't want to comment, but I think this thing is just so under the wire that it's just not out there. So, but anyway, I ended up naming them. And one thing I did too, as to the farmer, what do they need to know? What's in it for me? I had a sidebar on the next page about 7 steps to smarter fungicide use. And it talked about farmers could rotate different classes of fungicide. They could apply only when disease is imminent or when there's disease in the field. Very judicious use of fungicides. And I think that was the overriding factor in the story, is that we need fungicides. I mean, my goodness, we have diseases like tar spot. We have diseases, northern corn leaf blight, all kinds of things coming up. And fungicides are very good tools for dealing with that. But at the same time, repeatedly using fungicides, the same kind of class over and over again, going back to a sports analogy, it's kind of like if a baseball pitcher is just throwing fastball, fastball, fastball all the time. Well, pretty soon, one player like Aaron Judge with the Yankees is going to get up there and he's going to know a fastball is coming and he's just going to park it out of the park. And it's the same way with fungicides. If you use them repeatedly, even when disease is not imminent, when you use the same class over and over and over, the fungal agents that cause disease, they're going to figure out, and there's going to be resistance. And it not only spurs resistance to plant diseases, but there's a pretty good link that it could trigger disease resistance in human drugs. I know there's a fungal agent that I talked about on the story called Aspergillus fumigatus. Try saying that 5 times in a row. But that, when an azole drug that they use to treat it, when it's resistant, there's almost 100% fatality rate in it. This was a story that appeared in the magazine. I don't know if you could see that far side, but Holly Spangler recommended if there was something I could pull as to what farmers could do now to protect them. And it seems so far that this fungal link is mainly to compost products, to maybe you have some spoiled grain that's sitting there, or if you're working in an enclosed hay shed with hay bales, or working in an enclosed area with silage, that you might want to wear an N95 mask, because that's something that farmers can do right now to protect them. If you're out in the middle of a soybean field, no one is going to wear a mask, but you're in those tightly constrained areas, it might behoove farmers to wear one. So that's how the story layer or came out, the main story. That's the fungicide we had about how farmers could better use these products to keep them effective on the farm, but also in recognition that it could cause some problems in human health. So that's basically how I went through that story.
Awesome. Courtney, I'm curious, after listening to him kind of go through his process, what are some of the I guess what kind of things come to your mind? I'm just curious your take, because I know that this is on your mind and your heart a lot with students as you're trying to prepare them. What are some of your reactions to his process? Is that how is that different than what you think how students are sometimes getting through the process?
So, and Gil, thanks for giving us a peek at the process. I almost took a screenshot of the number of drafts you had. I think especially now, students sometimes, I think they view a draft, if it's not perfect, as a failure. And I tried to approach my writing instruction as a coach, like asking how many had played sports at some point in time, and how a coach comes in and points out the things that you could do a little bit better. And eventually they need to become their own coach. They need to be able to look at their own writing and say critically, this could be stronger, this could be better. So the other thing I really liked about what Gil presented that I'm going to take back to my students is, reading, reading articles, journal articles, academic articles. Also looking back at webinars. YouTube may have more than funny cat videos that would be relevant when they're writing. But those are just a couple quick things. I think also just recognizing that, and unfortunately we work under a semester time frame, right? And so saying a story takes time. Well, we have 16 weeks. That's the time that we have for students. And so I guess also helping them manage expectations of what could they reasonably accomplish in that amount of time, and what are the best strategies to go about doing so.
There's a question in the chat room about when I stop digging and when I start writing, and there's kind of a twofold answer to that. The easy one is when my deadline, when the story is due. That's probably the main one. But also I think it's when I feel confident that I have enough to move through. And on that story, the point is when I visited that person from the University of Iowa Public Health, because then I had the medical part of it. I had quite a bit from Allison Robertson at Iowa State, and a lot from Maren Brewer at the University of Georgia, and Carl Bradley at the University of Kentucky. I also had a farmer in northwestern Iowa that I interviewed last August, and actually it was a PR rep for an advertising agency who lined me up with him. And I told her that I would be asking him about that question, but I'll be asking him about some other things too. And we had a shorter story in the rest of the January book about he had like 6 agronomic steps he was going to take. But I did pull that out just because I thought it was important to get farmer perspective. And basically he said, if I can't use these fungicides, it's going to really be rough because there's diseases out there that I need to control. So I think that was one thing too that I liked about the story, is that I got the farmer angle in. And sometimes that's hard to do on a real complex subject, but it kind of broke him down on the farm just to what it meant to him. And I think I gave the story some feeling for farmers that when they read it, that yeah, I empathize with that guy.
Any other questions? I'm sure you have them. So feel free to, like, if you want to unmute and just ask, that's absolutely great, or you can type it over in the chat as well. Courtney, I'll be a filler while people are thinking here, because I wrote down little questions that you posed just as I thought that's a good reminder to me sometimes, because you kind of get in like robot mode as far as approach, and it just happens, but I don't know if I'm always thinking about my process while I'm doing it, if I'm being honest. What question do you think, so in your list of like, what does this mean? What will be the effect, the result, that list? Which question do you think is the question that gets missed the most by students, that they fail to work in, or that they don't understand maybe the value of it to the audience?
Well, and to Gil's point, I think sometimes they overlook, like, who will this impact? And in a feature story, we hope that they would include some quotes from people who are with, the story is about, and for. I mean, can the reader see themselves in the story and how it relates to them? And one thing that those of us who are working with young students, they don't read the types of writing we did growing up. And so most of what they're reading is not gate kept. It's social media. It's like, do you have an opinion? We'll put it out there. There you go. And so I'm really trying to help students reflect on, is what you're writing supported by others? Can you find a source to back that up? And that's not one of these main questions, but that's a question I'm constantly underlining, like, whose opinion is this? Where's your source? Just to help them become a bit more reflective on, you may think you know something, but until you can find evidence of it, you really don't. And so that's where I'm starting, Jennifer, with a lot of our students and helping build their media literacy skills.
I think one of the things that I and a lot of other editors struggle with is, I'll give you an example. Like, I think it was in our October issue, I did some outlook pieces for 2025. And I had a one source story. The headline was, "Is it time to buy farmland?" And had a very good source from Farmland Credit, but I mean, shoot, writing that thing, maybe 2 hours tops. So we put it on our website and boom, it gets just all kinds of views on it. Meanwhile, this story on the web, it had decent web readership, but just that one simple one source story had like 4 times the web readership or this one had on triazoles. And I think it gets back to Courtney's point. What do they already know, but what do they need to know? That I think that, there was a saying, he was actually a writing judge for the then Ag Editors Association, now Agricultural Communicators Network. And sometimes there's topics that you have to drag a reader in kicking and screaming. And I think this triazole fungicide story, it was one of them, because it's probably going to impact their use. I don't think you're ever going to see a ban on triazole fungicides. Never. But you might see a few more hoops to go through, maybe more restrictions or, something like that to make sure there's more judicious use of them. So, I think there's a balance. I mean, you can have those stories that just boom, they go crazy on the internet. But I do think that unless you accentuate that approach with good meaty stories like this triazole fungicide, that over the long term, I think you're going to lose readership on your website and in the magazine, because readers will get bored and they'll go elsewhere. There's a lot of stuff like that out there that they can go to, those simple stories that just go crazy. But I mean, long term, yeah, I think it's good to do these meaty kind of stories too.
I have a question for the group, if I can pose one. Because Dr. Kennedy and Lisa Mosier's on here. We're working with these young students and trying to develop their journalism skills, and many of you might hire interns. So what advice or words of wisdom do you want me to take back to my class when I meet with them, to say, hey, I had all these wonderful writers and communicators, and here's what they're looking for in their employees?
Well, just because we were talking about it, it's on my mind, I'll pop in with this one. I think that we just live in this world where no one can really say anything bad about you, or it's like, like we just can't take criticism, yet alone positive constructive criticism, right? And so I do think one of the things I feel like I've noticed is just kind of a difference. Like when I was in college, and I know it's many moons ago, clarify, I remember feeling good when my stories got inked up with red, because I was like, it's going to be better. Like I had this mentality of like, it's not good and not like, it's not good, to your point of all the different versions and revisions that Gil has. Like, it's not good enough if it's not had somebody, mark it up a little. And I think it's insulting to students if it's not perfect, like you said. So I guess just like the fact that we're getting edited, that we're editing ourselves, and you may not see our red ink, but we've done the red ink on our work. And we're also, on important or bigger stories, I definitely seek colleagues to try to help red ink mine up as well. And so I guess just that, like, be willing and excited for edits, because that's what makes us all better. And kind of, I don't know how you change that, because it feels cultural to me. too. But that might just be one thing that I've seen in working with some students and
Well,
just
I
on
grade
ground.
all my papers in purple ink because I bleed purple and their papers will too. But I tell them that every mark is a mark of love, that if I didn't care about them and want to see them improve, I wouldn't have taken the time to edit it. But to your point, Jennifer, I don't think they get that in high school. Like everything's submitted
Yeah.
electronically.
Mhm.
And I actually have a lesson this semester. I'm going to teach them how to use track changes. Another thing I learned at the Angus Journal, but they're not learning that within Google Docs or their other platforms. So thank you. I'm going to take this piece back to them and tell them that even all of these excellent writers still are getting feedback on their writing.
Mhm.
I think, we were talking before that, I'm preaching to the choir here because everyone is a writer, but I've worked with folks who aren't writers, they're from industry or academia, and most of them are just great. They'll just turn articles over to me and say, okay, work your magic. But there's some people I've worked with through my career that, well, like I had one, it was in a past life, but it was this crazy arrangement where this think tank, I'll call them, they were hired to be experts as part of an alliance. And I guess we were supposed to use them, but as part of the condition, they were supposed to have a 45-word tagline at the end of every article we used them, talking about how wonderful they were. And I remember one of them, I think it was going to be 45 words. And I just told them, if you're specifying 45 words, I'm going to whack it down to 35. And if you specify 35, I'm going to whack it down to 25 because that's my job. And they had stuff in there about like, oh, we achieve remarkable results. And of course, I'm thinking, as opposed to unremarkable, and it was just like that. And it was really, I remember we had a Zoom call where there were several people on, and I gave that example, and you could kind of tell their eyes were kind of narrowing. And then what really set the steam rising is I gave my Jesus wept analogy, and I said, probably the most widely read or widely remembered story in the Bible is when Jesus' friend Lazarus died, and they have the Bible verse, Jesus wept. And they didn't say, oh, tears came to Jesus's eyes as they flowed across the vast desert. No, Jesus wept. His best friend had died. He was really upset. that just kind of started the steamroll out of their ears. But I always kind of keep that in mind. Jesus wept, to say in as few words as possible. You can. I think that's a challenge with a scientific article. Like if Lazarus would have died from, and there were antifungal drugs in work, you'd have to say Lazarus died from Aspergillus fumigatus, something like that. But that's always a challenge with technical articles is you want to make sure that you're accurate. You want to make sure it's described accurately, but at the other time, you don't want to lose the audience either. There's a question about if corporate sources are more or less inclined to be quoted in stories like yours. Um, yeah, they are more or less, and I've kind of I've run into that before. I'm trying to think of one example. I've noticed that they send a lot of corporate statements more than they used to instead of interviewing a specialist. And that's not always the case. I mean, I've had companies who will say, yeah, we can line you up with an interview with this person or that person. So I think that's still occurring mainly where you can interview them. But yeah, I've noticed a lot more of that where there's some subjects they'll either put it in a statement or they just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to get back to you.
When I saw the question about how can students be taught to question sources. I teach one of the first kind of journalistic style writing classes in our curriculum. Many students have already taken news writing, but for those who haven't, it's the first time that an interview doesn't mean like applying for a job. So I'm trying to teach them like the goal of what is the goal of an interview? more time than I thought I needed to on building confidence and interpersonal skills, on how to, you know, build rapport, build trust, start to listen. I remember going to, it may have been an ag media summit at one point in time, but one of the speakers said, for every question you plan to ask 5 follow-ups. Now, I mean, that's a rule of thumb, but to me, it really points out to students that don't go through your robotic list. Like, you need to be listening to what your sources are saying and take opportunities to ask for clarification or examples or anecdotes. And it's something that, again, we're trying to build that skill set. Some of our students are very confident, and then we'll have others who say, you know, I'm very nervous to talk to someone. And so it's one of those things that we can't take for granted, that they're coming in with those soft skills and the ability to have those conversations. And I'm trying to help them. We're also doing kind of a article autopsy, where they read an article and then think about what questions did the writer ask to get that information. And maybe the question wasn't to a person source, it was to, you know, a journal article and a medical example, but just helping, again, building that critical thinking and helping students think about the process that goes into writing this in this style. Oh, and I see, yeah, to evaluate, it's challenge or critique. Yeah, so it's I do some low risk writing assignments where students interview each other. And I remember one time I had them partner, and I knew that one of the students was a bull rider. And I knew that he had broken his jaw bull riding and had it wired shut. And although he was past that injury for the class, the student who interviewed him never mentioned, like, she didn't even get below the surface that he was in. I'm like, what runs through a person's head that makes them think, I'm going to continually put myself on this wild animal that will actively try to remove me and kill me? And so I brought him up to the front of the room, and I had her permission. I said, I'm going to interview him like I would have. And the students told me after that, then they realized that they can't approach an interview as much of like, okay, check, I got that done. They really need to approach it as a curious conversation of wanting to get to know that other person. And those of you who have been doing this for a number of years, you're really good at it, but our students need a little more support and encouragement to get them to where they're comfortable being the leader in that conversation.
Well, I do not mean to like hurry this along. I think we could probably keep chatting all day. This has been so interesting and good. I'm so grateful for the time that you guys have given us to chat about your process. I know it takes time to put the slides together, so please know how much we appreciate it. I wanted to turn it over to Stacy Fox really fast for just a couple of quick announcements if you're able to stay on for about a minute or two.
Yes, I will be super quick. Thank you. Great to see such a great crowd today. Thank you so much to our speakers for taking this time. It was really informative, and I loved all the questions and everything. So thank you for that. CattleCon is next week. So if you're going to be in San Antonio and haven't gotten your luncheon ticket for the LPC luncheon, it is Wednesday, February 5th at 11:45. And we still have plenty of tickets available. So we hope that you'll be able to join us if you are going to be at CattleCon. We also have our drawdown, which we have about 5 great items, including $250 worth of beef, a $250 Modern Litho gift card. Livestock Marketing Association has donated some wine, and we have some other things that I didn't get my list in front of me right now, but we're really, really grateful for all of our donors, an AMS registration as well. And those are only $10 each, and you do not have to be in attendance to purchase those. So if you would like a ticket, please let me know. But yeah, for everybody that's going to be at CattleCon next week, we certainly hope that you will join us for our luncheon, where we visit, see people that we haven't seen in maybe a year, and recognize our award winners for the year. Also, membership renewals have gone out out. So if you're looking at renewing your membership, we'd love to have you back and start thinking about contest entries because those open in March. So that is all I have. Thank you all for being on today, and really grateful for and Jennifer, all the work that you put into these.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Happy writing and editing.